Welcome, dear students. In this lecture, we are going to discuss path of water in the root. Water is absorbed by the root hair through imbibition, diffusion, osmosis sequentially. According to E. Munch in 1932, water moves from the soil to xylem through epidermis, cortex, endodermis, and pericycle along two different pathways, apoplast and symplast. Munch suggested that water moves from the soil to the xylem through epidermis, cortex, endodermis, and pericycle along two different pathways, that is apoplast pathway and symplast pathway. Now we can discuss on the apoplast pathway. In the apoplast pathway, movement of water takes place exclusively through walls, cell walls, and intercellular spaces. In apoplast pathway, what happens? The water takes place exclusively through the cell walls and intercellular spaces. This movement is non-osmotic and occurs due to the imbibition. The cellulosic walls of root hairs, cortical cells, endodermis, and pericycle are hydrophilic in nature and permeable to water, so that water moves through them. That type of pathway is known as apoplast pathway. And next pathway is symplast pathway. In the symplast pathway, water travels from the cell to cell through cytoplasmic bridges called plasmodesmata. The plasmodesmata interconnect the cytoplasm of the cells and form cytoplasmic network, that is called symplast. Water moves through it from root hairs to cortex, hence called symplast pathway. The endodermis is internal to the cortex and endodermal cells are with Casparian strips. These Casparian strips are made up of wax-like substances called suberin. It does not allow water to pass through. Water accumulates and develops hydrostatic pressure. Just opposite, just opposite to protoxylem, endodermis is the passage cells, and water move through the passage cells which are not suberized. Water is there forced. Water is then forced in the xylem and is conducted upward. What happened in the simplest pathway? In simplest pathway, water travels from cell to cell through cytoplasmic bridges, that is called as plasmodesmata. The plasmodesmata interconnect the cytoplasm of the cells and form cytoplasmic network, and that is called symplast. Water moves through it from the root hair to cortex, hence called symplast pathway. The endodermis is internal to the cortex and endodermal cells are with Casparian strips. These Casparian strips are made up of wax-like substances like suberin. It does not allow water to pass through it. So water accumulates and develop hydrostatic pressure. Just opposite to the protoxylem, endodermis is with passage cells and water moves through the passage cells which are not suberized. Water is then forced in the xylem and is conducted upward. This is the simplest pathway. Now the mechanism of absorption of water by the root hairs. There are two methods of absorption of water: active absorption and passive absorption. Now we can discuss on both the types of absorption. First we see the active absorption. Water enters the root hairs by osmosis. You know that water enters through the root hairs by the process of osmosis. The water moves from the root hair to the cortical cells and from one cortical cell to another by the gradient of water potential. Because of water molecules, or water has a water potential, and because of that the water moves from one cortical cell to the another cortical cell. Root hairs and cortical cells of the roots have higher osmotic potential than the soil solution. Hence, water moves from cell to cell by osmosis. Therefore, this is called osmotic mechanism of water absorption. When water enter into the root hairs by osmosis, it becomes fully turgid and its diffusion pressure deficit or water potential becomes zero. Inner cortical cells with higher DPD, that is the osmotic pressure. Therefore, water moves into the inner cortical cell by osmosis. These cells become turgid and its DPD becomes zero. Water from this cell move to the next inner cell, and in this way each cell becomes alternately turgid and flaccid, and water moves from the cell to cell into cortex. Metabolic energy is required to maintain high osmotic pressure, hence the process is called active absorption. What happened in the active absorption? Water enters into the root hairs by osmosis, you know that. The entire water moves from root hairs to the cortical cells and from one cortical cell to the another cortical cell by gradient of water potential. Root hairs and cortical cells of the root have higher osmotic pressure than that of soil solution. Hence, the water moves from cell to cell by osmosis. Therefore, it is also known as osmotic mechanism. Water enters in the root hairs by osmosis. The cell become fully turgid and its DPD becomes zero. The inner cortical cells with higher DPD, therefore water move into the inner cortical cell, and in this way from one cell to other cell, one cell is turgid, then flaccid, then turgid, then flaccid, and in this way the water enters into the, and that process the metabolic energy is required because to maintain the high osmotic pressure, as that is known as active absorption. Next is the passive absorption. In this method, the living cells of root do not play any important role in absorption. When the leaf loses water due to the transpiration, it develops water deficit and draws water from the petiole from the stem, and stem from a root. The suction force is thus transmitted from veins to root hairs. The root system just acts as a physical absorbing organ, provides surface for absorption. There is no expenditure of metabolic energy, hence the process is considered as passive absorption. What happened in the passive absorption? In the passive absorption, no need of energy. Because of transpiration, suction force is generated, and because of that suction force, water moves in upward direction. That's why it is known as passive absorption. We can stop here. Thank you.